Imagine, you're preparing the perfect anniversary dinner, and your wife calmly announces, "I've been cheating on you for 2 years, and I'm leaving." That's how the night began for 35-year-old Jake from Seattle, who lost everything, and yet found a way to get revenge without breaking the law. What did he do? And how did it change his life forever? Jake Reed adjusted his tie in the dim glow of the restaurant's restroom mirror, his reflection staring back with a mix of nerves and anticipation. At 35, the Seattle-based architect had poured weeks into planning this night, his 10th anniversary with Emily. The table at Skyline Bistro was perfect, nestled by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Puget Sound, the city lights twinkling like stars against the dark water. He'd even called ahead to ensure her favorite Pinot Noir came with a satin ribbon tied around the bottle, a small touch he knew she'd love. In his pocket sat a custom pendant engraved with their wedding date, a gift he'd spent months designing. Tonight, he thought, could be a reset, a chance to bridge the growing distance he'd felt between them. The hostess led him back to the table just as Emily arrived. At 34, she still turned heads. Her wine-red dress hugged her frame, and her chestnut hair fell in soft waves. She smiled that old, familiar smile, the one that used to light up his world back when they were broke newlyweds sharing a tiny apartment. "You've outdone yourself, Jake," she said, sliding into her seat. The compliment warmed him, and for a moment, he let himself believe the last few months of cold silences and late nights were just a rough patch. The waiter poured the wine, and Jake raised his glass, his rehearsed toast ready. "To 10 years, he began, voice steady, "and everything we've built together." "I've been cheating on you for 2 years," Emily cut in, her tone as calm as if she were ordering dessert. "With Kyle from work. And I'm leaving you." The words hit like a freight train, but her face didn't flinch. No tears, no hesitation, just cold certainty. Jake's glass hovered midair, the wine sloshing slightly as his hand trembled. The restaurant's hum faded into a dull roar in his ears. He waited for her to laugh, to say it was a cruel joke, but her hazel eyes locked on his, unyielding. 2 years. 24 months of lies while he'd been designing homes, raising their son Liam, and trying to keep their family afloat. The pendant in his pocket suddenly felt like a lead weight. Anger surged, hot and sharp, but he swallowed it down, years of self-control kicking in. Instead of shouting, he did something even he didn't expect. He smiled. A slow, deliberate curve of his lips. "To your new life, then," he said, voice matching her calm, and clinked his glass against hers. Emily's brows furrowed, a flicker of confusion breaking her composure. She'd braced for a fight, tears, maybe even begging. "Not this. You're not serious," she said, leaning forward slightly, testing him. "Oh, I am," Jake replied, taking a measured sip of the Pinot. The bitterness on his tongue mirrored the storm brewing inside, but he kept his mask intact. "So, tell me, does he make you happy?" Emily shifted in her seat, her confident facade cracking just a hair. "It's complicated," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. That hesitation was a tell. Jake knew her too well. She wasn't as sure as she pretended. The waiter approached with menus, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped, and Jake waved him off with a polite nod. "We'll need a minute," he said, then turned back to her. 2 years is a long time to keep a secret, Em. You must have gotten good at it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't bite back. "Not yet." Jake leaned back, the gears already turning in his mind. She thought she'd blindsided him, that she held all the cards. But he'd felt the shift months ago. The late nights, the locked phone, the excuses. He hadn't confronted her then, needing proof, needing certainty. Now, with her confession laid bare, the game had changed. And Jake wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. "You're taking this awfully well," she said, suspicion lacing her voice. He shrugged, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "Why wouldn't I? You made your choice. I'm just here to enjoy the wine." But inside, his heart pounded, a mix of betrayal and resolve fueling his next move. She didn't know it yet, but this dinner wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The air in Skyline Bistro thickened as Emily's words lingered between them, her confession a jagged edge cutting through the polished ambience. Jake set his wine glass down, the faint clink against the table louder than it should have been in the quiet bubble they'd created. Her eyes searched his face, waiting for the crack. Anger, despair, something to validate her control over this moment. But Jake's smile held, a steel trap masking the chaos beneath. Complicated? Huh, he said, tilting his head. That's one way to put it. Emily straightened, her fingers tightening around her glass. You don't get to judge me, Jake. Not after how distant you've been. Her voice carried a rehearsed edge, like she'd practiced this defense in front of a mirror. Jake raised an eyebrow, letting her words hang for a beat. Distant. The irony stung. He'd spent the last 2 years juggling late nights at the firm, designing eco-friendly homes, and coaching Liam's soccer games, all while she'd been building a double life with Kyle. But he didn't rise to the bait. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket, not for the pendant, but for his phone. Hold that thought, he said casually, tapping out a quick message. Emily frowned, suspicion flickering in her eyes. What are you doing? She asked, her tone sharpening. Jake didn't answer, just slipped the phone back into his jacket and took another sip of wine. You'll see, he said, his voice low and deliberate. She opened her mouth to press him, but the restaurant door swung open with a soft chime, cutting her off. A tall figure stepped inside. Kyle, her co-worker turned lover, dressed in a tailored blazer that screamed overconfidence. His dark hair was slicked back, and a faint smirk played on his lips as he scanned the room. Jake watched Emily's face drain of color, her composure slipping like sand through her fingers. Jake, what the hell? She started, but he raised a hand, silencing her. Kyle, he called out, waving him over with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Glad you could make it. Kyle hesitated, his smirk faltering as he approached the table. Emily? What's going on? He asked, his gaze darting between them. Have a seat, Jake said, gesturing to the empty chair. I figured since you and Emily are so close, it's about time we met properly. Kyle slid into the chair, confusion etching lines into his forehead. I got a text saying you needed me here, he said, glancing at Emily. Was that you? No, she snapped, her voice trembling as she glared at Jake. He set this up. Jake shrugged, leaning back with an air of nonchalance. Call it an anniversary surprise. 2 years is worth celebrating, right? Emily's hands clenched the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. This is insane, Jake. You're humiliating me. He met her gaze, unflinching. Humiliating you? I'm just getting the family together. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling. Look, man, I don't know what you're playing at, he began, but Jake cut him off. Oh, I think you do. Emily's been filling you in on how terrible I am, hasn't she? How I'm the cold, distant husband who drove her into your arms. Kyle's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. Thing is, Kyle, she didn't tell you the whole story. Like how she's been lying to me, and you, for 2 years. Emily's breath hitched, panic flashing in her eyes. Jake, stop it, she hissed. This isn't the place. He ignored her, turning to Kyle. She tell you it started 6 months ago? Because that's what she told you, right? Funny how the timeline keeps shifting. Kyle's head snapped toward Emily, accusation darkening his features. 6 months? You said, he started, but she cut in, her voice tight. He's twisting everything, Kyle. Don't listen to him. Jake chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Twisting? No, I've got receipts. Literally. He tapped his phone on the table, a silent promise of what was to come. Emily's face went ashen. She knew him well enough to sense the trap closing. Kyle, meanwhile, looked like a deer caught in headlights, his perfect little affair unraveling before his eyes. The waiter approached, oblivious to the tension, and Jake waved him off again. We're still catching up, he said with a polite nod, then turned back to the table. So, he said, folding his hands, where were we? Oh, right, 2 years of secrets. Let's talk about that. Emily glared at him, her control slipping further with every word. Kyle's confusion deepened, and Jake savored the moment. She thought she could drop her bombshell and walk away clean. She was wrong. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a reckoning, and Jake was only getting started. The table at Skyline Bistro was a battlefield now, the air crackling with unspoken accusations. Emily's eyes darted between Jake and Kyle, her once cool facade fracturing under the weight of their stares. Kyle leaned forward, his voice low but edged with betrayal. 6 months, Em? That's what you told me. What's he talking about? 2 years. Jake watched her squirm, her lips parting as she scrambled for an answer. He's exaggerating, she said, her tone brittle. Don't let him get in your head. Jake let out a soft, bitter laugh, twirling his wine glass by the stem. Exaggerating? That's rich. He pulled his phone from his jacket, unlocking it with a deliberate swipe. See, I've had a hunch for a while. Late nights, locked screens, work trips that didn't add up. So I hired someone. A professional. Emily's breath caught, her hands trembling slightly. What are you saying? She demanded, but the fear in her voice betrayed her. Jake didn't blink. I'm saying I've got proof. 2 years' worth. He turned the screen toward them, revealing a photo. Emily and Kyle laughing outside a downtown cafe, time-stamped over a year ago. He swiped again, another shot, this one of them slipping into a hotel lobby, arms linked. Then a screenshot of a text from Emily to Kyle. He's clueless. We're fine. Dated 18 months back. Kyle's face hardened, his jaw clenching as he processed the timeline. You lied to me, he muttered, shoving back from the table. You said it was new, that I was... He stopped, disgust, twisting his features. Emily reached for him, desperation creeping in. Kyle, wait, I didn't want to overwhelm you. But he shook her off, standing abruptly. Overwhelm me? You played me. Jake leaned back, folding his arms, letting the chaos unfold. Welcome to the club, he said, his tone dry as ash. Emily whipped toward him, her eyes blazing. You're sick, Jake. Dragging him into this, what's wrong with you? He met her glare, unflinching. What's wrong with me? I'm not the one who torched a marriage for a fling. The waiter hovered nearby, sensing the tension, but unsure how to intervene. Jake waved him over with a tight smile. Another bottle of the Pinot, please. We're just getting started. As the waiter scurried off, Jake turned back to Kyle. So, what did she tell you about me? That I'm some controlling jerk? That I pushed her away? Kyle hesitated, then nodded stiffly. She said you didn't care anymore. That the marriage was dead. Jake's smile faded, replaced by a cold edge. Funny. I was working 60-hour weeks to keep our life afloat while she was screwing you in hotel rooms. Emily slammed her glass down, wine sloshing onto the tablecloth. Enough, Jake. You've made your point. He ignored her, pulling up an audio file on his phone. Not quite. He pressed play, and her voice filled the space, recorded from a call months ago. Jake's too busy to notice. We've got all the time in the world. Kyle's eyes widened, and Emily froze, her face a mask of horror. You recorded me? She whispered. Legally, Jake replied coolly. Washington's a one-party consent state. I checked. Kyle stormed toward the door, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm done here, he snapped, not looking back. Emily stood to follow, but Jake's voice stopped her cold. Sit down, Eminesia. We're not finished. She sank back in her seat, defeated, as he opened his laptop, brought in his bag, unnoticed until now. See, I've been busy too, he said, typing quickly. While you're confessing, I uploaded everything. Photos, text recordings. Tag you both. It's live now. Her phone buzzed on the table, notifications lighting up the screen. Friends, coworkers, family, all reacting to the public post. You didn't, she breathed, snatching it up. But the views were already climbing, 100, 500, 1,000. Comments poured in. 2 years? Disgusting. Poor Jake. Karma's coming. She looked at him, panic giving way to rage. You're ruining me. Jake closed the laptop, his expression unreadable. No, Eminesia. You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone knows. The waiter returned with the wine, setting it down with a nervous glance. Jake poured himself a glass, raising it in a mock toast. To honesty, he said, and drank deeply. Emily stared at him, her world crumbling in real time. While outside, Kyle disappeared into the night. Jake's revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was surgical, lawful, and devastating. And he wasn't done yet. The restaurant's warm glow felt like a cruel joke as Emily stared at her phone, the screen a flood of notifications, each one a nail in the coffin of her carefully curated life. Jake sat across from her, sipping his wine with a calm that bordered on eerie, the half-empty bottle of Pinot Noir a silent witness to the wreckage. Her hand shook as she scrolled through the comments. 2 years of cheating? Wow. Hope Jake takes her to the cleaners. Kyle's just as bad. The post, photos, texts, that damning audio had gone viral overnight, shared by friends, co-workers, even her yoga instructor. She looked up at him, her voice a raw whisper. You've destroyed me, Jake. Happy now? He set his glass down, meeting her gaze with steel in his eyes. Happy? No. Satisfied? Maybe. He leaned forward, his tone low and deliberate. You thought you could drop that bomb and waltz out of here like nothing happened. But actions have consequences, Em. She flinched, tears brimming, but not falling. She wouldn't give him that. This is overkill, she spat. You didn't have to make it public. Jake shrugged. You didn't have to lie for 2 years. Guess we're both full of surprises. The door swung open again, and Kyle stormed back in, his face flushed with fury. You're a bastard, Jake, he barked, stopping a few feet from the table. You think this is funny, airing our dirty laundry? Jake didn't flinch. Funny? No. Fair? Absolutely. You helped trash my family, Kyle. Did you think I'd just shake your hand and wish you well? Kyle's fists clenched, but he didn't step closer. Too many eyes in the room. She told me you were done, he said, glaring at Emily. That I was saving her. Saving her. Jake laughed, sharp and cold. From what? A husband who paid the bills while she screwed you in a Marriott? Kyle turned on Emily, his voice rising. You said 6 months, Em. 6. Not 2 damn years. She stood, desperation clawing at her composure. I didn't want to scare you off, okay? It doesn't change how I feel. But Kyle was already backing away. You're a liar. I'm out. He shoved through the door, leaving her stranded. Emily sank back in her chair, her breath ragged. You've ruined everything, she muttered. Jake tilted his head. Not everything. Yet, her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? He pulled a folder from his bag, plain, unmarked, but heavy with intent. While you were busy with Kyle, I had my PI dig deeper. Found some interesting transactions. Our joint account's been bleeding. Thousands funneled to miscellaneous expenses. Hotel bills, dinners, a nice little cash withdrawal last month. Ring a bell. Her face went white. You can't prove that, she stammered. Oh, I can, Jake said, sliding the folder across the table. Bank statements, receipts, timestamps. My lawyer's already got copies. She didn't touch it, just stared like it might bite. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice wavered. Jake stood, tossing a few bills on the table for the check. We'll see in court. Oh, and Liam? He's staying with me. You've got enough to figure out without dragging him into this mess. He walked out, leaving her alone with the folder and the wreckage of her choices. By morning, the fallout hit hard. Emily's boss called. Her marketing firm couldn't handle the PR nightmare. She was fired. Her phone buzzed with texts from friends cutting ties, their sympathy replaced by disgust. Kyle ghosted her completely, his own career teetering as his firm caught wind of the scandal. Jake, meanwhile, drove home to their suburban Seattle house, Liam asleep in the back seat. He'd already called his lawyer, Ethan, and forwarded the financial evidence. File for full custody in the house, he'd said. She's got nothing left to stand on. 2 days later, Emily showed up at the house, her eyes sunken, her designer coat swapped for a faded hoodie. Jake, please, she begged through the cracked door. Take it down. I'll do anything. Counseling, whatever you want. He blocked the entrance, his voice flat. You stole from us, Em. From Liam. This isn't about me anymore. It's about him. She crumpled, tears finally spilling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Jake shook his head. Too late. You picked your path. Now walk it. He closed the door, the lock clicking with finality. The next week, he sold the house and moved with Liam to Portland. A fresh start, away from the ghosts of betrayal. Emily's world kept shrinking, but Jake's next move was already in motion, and she had no idea how deep the hole she dug really was. The Portland air smelled of pine and possibility as Jake unpacked the last box in their new home. A modest craftsman with a wraparound porch, a far cry from the sprawling Seattle house he'd left behind. Liam, now 8, darted through the empty rooms, his laughter bouncing off the hardwood floors. Can I have the room with the big window? He called, peering out of the backyard. Jake grinned, setting down a stack of plates. All yours, buddy. It had been a month since the dinner that shattered his old life, and while the scars remained, they were starting to fade beneath the promise of something better. Emily's downfall had been swift and merciless, not by Jake's hand, but by the weight of her own choices. The viral post had stripped her of everything: her job, her social circle, her pride. Her marketing firm cut her loose within days, unwilling to weather the public backlash. Friends who'd once filled her Instagram with heart emojis now unfollowed her in droves, their silence louder than any condemnation. Kyle, too, had vanished. His own career imploded when his law firm sidelined him over the scandal, and rumors swirled of the pending lawsuit for misusing company funds. Emily tried to fight back, posting a tearful apology video online, but the comments were brutal. Own it, don't cry about it. 2 years isn't a mistake, it's a lifestyle. She deleted it within hours. Jake hadn't stopped there, though. The financial evidence, thousands siphoned from their joint account, sealed her fate in court. His lawyer, Ethan, was relentless, presenting bank records and receipts that painted a clear picture of betrayal. The judge awarded Jake full custody of Liam and the bulk of their assets, leaving Emily with a rented studio apartment on the edge of Tacoma and a mountain of regret. She'd called him once, her voice broken over the line. "I'm sorry, Jake. I've lost everything." He'd paused, then said simply, "You had everything. You chose to throw it away." He hung up, and that was the last he heard from her. Now in Portland, life was quieter but fuller. Liam thrived in his new school, his soccer cleats muddying the porch most afternoons. Jake threw himself into his work, designing sustainable homes with a passion he hadn't felt in years. Then there was Sophia, a 33-year-old interior designer who lived 2 doors down. She knocked on his door one rainy Saturday with a plate of brownies and a warm smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said, her dark curls damp from the drizzle. Liam had taken to her instantly, and over weeks, their chats over coffee turned into something more. One evening, as they sat on the porch sanding wood for a custom bookshelf, Jake's latest project, Liam ran up, holding a tiny green sprout in a pot. "Look, Dad, it's growing," he beamed. Sophia laughed, ruffling his hair. "You've got a green thumb, kiddo." Jake watched them, a warmth spreading in his chest. Later, as Liam napped inside, Sophia turned to him, her brown eyes steady. "You're doing great with him, you know, after everything." Jake nodded, sanding a rough edge smooth. "I just want him to feel safe, loved. The rest? It's behind us." She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but sure. "You deserve that too, Jake. Peace. Happiness." He squeezed her hand, the weight of her words sinking in. Sophia wasn't a replacement for what he'd lost. She was a new chapter, built on trust and quiet strength. Months later, they planted a small garden together. Liam digging holes, Sophia picking flowers, Jake hauling soil. As the sun dipped below the trees, Liam looked up, dirt smudged on his cheek. "Dad, are you happy now?" Jake knelt beside him, smiling. "Bull. Really happy." Emily's name rarely came up anymore. Word from mutual acquaintances was she'd moved in with her parents, working odd jobs at a grocery store, her once glamorous life a distant memory. Kyle had relocated somewhere east, his reputation in tatters. Their consequences weren't Jake's doing, they'd reaped what they sowed. He'd simply shone a light on the truth and walked away. That night, as crickets chirped outside, Jake sat at the kitchen table with a beer, Sophia beside him sketching designs for a client. Liam's drawings covered the fridge, stick figures of the 3 of them, a soccer ball, a garden. Jake glanced at them, then at Sophia, her pencil scratching softly. "Thanks," he said suddenly. She looked up, curious. "For what?" He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "For reminding me life goes on." She smiled back, resting her head on his shoulder. "Always does. You just have to choose it." And he had. The betrayal, the pain, the chaos, it was all a fading echo now, drowned out by laughter, love, and the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. Jake raised his bottle in a silent toast to the past that shaped him and the future he'd claimed.